My name is Jordan Blake. I'm 34. I live in Austin. And for the last 8 years, I've worked as a backend developer at a fintech startup no one outside the industry has ever heard of. We move money-secure transactions and keep systems from crashing during payroll runs, which means the only time people notice us is when something breaks. I'm the guy who makes sure that doesn't happen. My code runs silently at 2 a.m., reconciling thousands of lines of data, balancing ledgers, flagging fraud patterns, and doing it all without a single notification popping up. Which is probably why no one in marketing knows what I look like. I don't complain about it, not out loud, but you notice things when you're the person everyone forgets to copy on the celebratory email, even when the system that saved the quarter was the one you patched in a weekend. Or when your manager thanks the team for pulling through and doesn't even glance in your direction. I've gotten used to the background. Most days I prefer it. No meetings, no small talk, just clean code and a steady flow of espresso. But something shifted last week. We signed a huge client, a national banking group, the kind with federal compliance and security audits that make grown engineers sweat. When the announcement hit Slack, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. The kind of hope that maybe this time I'd get to step up, that maybe I'd finally be seen for what I bring to the table, instead of just being the person who silently cleans up everyone else's mess. They say every big break starts with a meeting you almost skipped. Mine was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. I brought coffee, my notebook, and just enough optimism to believe something might be different this time. Turns out I was right. Just not in the way I expected. Ryan showed up on a Monday morning wearing a navy blazer, tan slacks, and the kind of smile you only see on real estate billboards or political candidates during election season. He shook hands like the motivational speaker and dropped names like it was a networking event. The CEO introduced him as our new product lead for the banking project, said he came from a top-tier consultancy and had already turned around 2 failing fintech apps before the age of 30. Ryan was 29. Harvard MBA resume sharp enough to cut glass. He talked fast-used words like synergy and velocity without irony and managed to make PowerPoint slides feel like TED Talks. By the end of his first day, he knew everyone's name and had booked one-on-ones with every team lead except engineering. When we finally met, it wasn't scheduled. He walked into the dev room unannounced, looked around like he'd just discovered electricity, and said he needed someone who really knew the back end. I raised a hand, introduced myself, and he lit up like I was the missing piece in his master plan. He didn't ask what I'd built. He asked if I could help him build what he'd already promised. By Thursday, he was forwarding me client questions with one-line instructions. Handle this, update that, no context, no thanks. Just the assumption that I'd make the magic happen behind the scenes. He'd send screenshots of my dashboards with his name in the footer and talk about system architecture like he'd hand-coded it during a silent retreat in Tahoe. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. Let him play the game. I didn't need credit. But then I watched him demo my work in front of the client team, walk them through functions I'd written line by line, and pitch it as a collaborative innovation. He dropped my name once, tucked between phrases like our engineers and back-end support. I started noticing the shift. My Slack messages went unanswered while his announcements got company-wide emojis. He booked meetings to showcase deliverables I hadn't even shared yet. He started describing my database design as his modular integration strategy. And no one questioned it because he looked the part. He sounded like success. The real kicker came during a stakeholder check-in when the client applauded our speed and precision. Ryan leaned back, smiled, and said it all came down to having the right vision. Then he gestured vaguely toward me, like I was part of the furniture. That's when the bitterness settled in. Not loud, not explosive. Just the quiet kind that wraps around your ribs and makes you start keeping receipts. I wasn't angry yet. Not really. But something in me started shifting. I stopped seeing Ryan as a coworker. I started seeing him as a risk vector. a walking liability with a strong jaw and a weak grasp on source control. And I knew eventually he'd go too far. All I had to do was be ready. It was late Thursday afternoon when Ryan stepped into my workspace without knocking. He didn't sit, just stood in the doorway like he was on a tight schedule, and I was the last item on his list. He told me he needed credentials to the staging environment so he could prep a demo for Monday's client preview. No explanation, no conversation. Just a statement dropped, like it was a given that I'd comply. I looked up from my screen, made eye contact long enough to feel the weight of what he was really saying. He didn't want help. He wanted control. That request wasn't just overstepping. It was a red flag pulsing in the middle of everything I'd built. The staging environment wasn't a PowerPoint deck. It was live code, real integrations logic that could misfire badly if handled by someone who didn't know what they were doing. Ryan didn't know what he was doing. He smiled like he'd already won, like I was just another checkbox between him and another client win. I nodded slowly and said I'd send him access later that day. But my mind had already shifted gears. Something clicked. Not anger, not even defiance. Just a clear, cold understanding that if he was going to steal my work, I might as well give him exactly what he was asking for. I opened a new folder, named it Clean Demo, with a capital C, just like our naming convention. Inside, I didn't give him bugs. I gave him brilliance laced with subtle failure. Calculations just a hair off. Reports that looked solid, but collapsed under real-world queries. A perfect house of cards. When I hit send, I added one sentence. Here's the link to staging credentials included. It looked like help. It felt like surrender, but really, it was the first move in a much longer game. The trick wasn't making something that looked wrong. It was making something that looked perfect. I cloned our staging repo, stripped out anything critical, and began crafting a version of the system designed to fail with style. The transaction logic was my first touch. I inverted a key conditional so that transfers would double count under high load, something only visible when real-world concurrency hit. Then I embedded a reporting mismatch that labeled flagged transactions as cleared, all wrapped in a dashboard with flawless formatting. Next came the currency conversion bug. I fed international accounts through a fixed-rate function and swapped the actual rates with stale numbers from last quarter. The projections would look amazing to anyone chasing growth, but would fall apart during the first real audit. I tweaked the security alert too, logged access events as false positives, which would silence most warnings unless someone traced logs back more than a week. And the cherry on top was a latency patch that only failed under mobile authentication protocols, perfect for a client demo on DA desktop, but disastrous in field testing. Each flaw was intentional, subtle, lethal in combination, and buried deep enough that only someone who knew the system's architecture would catch them. To tie it all together, I signed each script the way I always do. My initials hidden in comment lines, commit history backdated through Git rebase creation, timestamps layered with fake edit sessions. It all looked like I'd built this version months ago, just waiting for polish. I called the folder Clean Demo Final, uploaded it to the shared drive, and logged every action. I even tracked when Ryan opened it. He pulled files one by one, renamed them, and started prepping his pitch. Watching it happen in real time felt like standing at the edge of a fuse I'd just lit. And I wasn't nervous. I was ready. The conference room lights dimmed just enough to make the projector glow sharply against the wall. Ryan stood in front of the screen like he was about to unveil a miracle. His suit was tailored, his tone effortless, and he started by thanking everyone for the chance to present what he called a next-gen financial intelligence platform. He clicked to the first slide and spoke with practiced rhythm. The dashboard pulsed with clean visuals, color-coded insights, and buzzwords polished to a mirror shine. He paced slowly, dropping phrases like dynamic architecture and predictive compliance modeling. The clients nodded along at first. The COO even smiled when Ryan showed the fraud detection module which I knew flagged everything with the wrong logic tree. He breezed through a flowchart I'd built last year, now rebranded with his own acronyms. From my seat in the back, I watched every head in the room follow his performance like it was gospel. But then came the questions. Not big ones, just small, careful prods from the bank's lead engineer. She asked about concurrency handling during high-volume settlements. Ryan blinked, gave a vague answer about system load balancing, and moved on. Another client rep followed up with a question about exchange rates across multi-region accounts. Ryan smiled, said the system auto-updates daily, which was only true in the real version I hadn't given him. I saw someone in the back of the room check a tablet, their brow furrowed. Another exec asked why flagged wire transfers still showed as cleared in the audit report. Ryan hesitated for just a breath. He tried spinning it as a visibility feature, saying it was meant to show resolved cases alongside active ones. The lead engineer tilted her head, clearly unconvinced. Someone else chimed in about mobile login issues during authentication tests. He faltered, glanced at his laptop. His voice tightened just slightly as he reassured them that everything worked as expected. The room got quieter. People were no longer nodding. They were scrolling through notes, comparing what he said to what they'd already seen. Then came the final question. A quiet one from the CFO. She asked why their international accounts showed identical growth projections in USD and AUD despite known fluctuations. Ryan's face froze for a second too long. I could feel the silence press in as he stumbled through an answer about stabilized currency assumptions. No one believed it. Not anymore. The cracks had spread. The pitch was still going, but the confidence was gone. And I knew the collapse had already started. I waited until the silence stretched just a second too long. Then I stood. No announcement, no fanfare, just the soft scrape of my chair against the floor and the calm weight of a laptop in my hands. I walked to the front of the room without looking at Ryan. He stepped slightly aside, unsure whether to stop me or let it happen. I plugged in my HDMI and waited for the projector to shift screens. The real dashboard lit up, not flashier, not louder, just clean. Every data point is tied to a verifiable source. Every chart is annotated with assumptions. Every number is explainable. I turned to the room and spoke evenly. The flagged transactions appeared cleared because Ryan's version skipped a secondary check built into the pipeline. Ours doesn't. I clicked once and showed the correct flagging flow with timestamp logs. The concurrency issue. My build handled spikes through batched queues, which I demonstrated in real time with a testing script I had prepped. As I explained the mobile authentication bug, one of the engineers leaned forward, eyes wide, nodding slowly. Then I addressed the currency error. I pulled up the real exchange feed and showed how the demo model had used fixed numbers from an archived source. The AUD and USD columns diverged correctly on my screen. I watched the CFO exhale. Ryan said nothing. He stood frozen, just left of the screen, arms stiff at his sides. His confidence gone, his charm cracking. No one was looking at him anymore. They were looking at me, at the system that worked, at the numbers that made sense. The engineer who hadn't said much until now suddenly had every answer. I ended with the audit log, my own credentials, my own timestamps, my own tracked changes. Proof that what they'd been shown before was built without review, tested without care, and presented without understanding. The shift in the room wasn't loud. It was decisive. Heads nodded, tablets closed. No one spoke for a moment. Then the lead engineer said softly that this was what they had expected from the beginning. Ryan took a step back. Someone from our executive team touched his arm. It was done. And I hadn't raised my voice once. The meeting ended quietly. No dramatic exits, no raised voices, just a clear decision made behind closed doors. By the end of the day, Ryan's desk was empty, and IT had revoked his credentials. The announcement came the next morning. A short, company-wide email from our CEO stating that I would be stepping into the role of head of engineering Effective. Immediately. No backstory. No ceremony. Just a sentence that finally placed my name where it belonged. At first, it felt surreal. People who hadn't spoken to me in months suddenly wanted my input. Slack threads got quieter when I joined. One by one, the engineers who had been quietly struggling started dropping by to ask real questions, not just about code, but about how I'd pulled it off. I didn't give them the full story, just enough to let them know it wasn't luck. It was planning patience and the right moment. And it was time. A week later, I got an email from Ryan. The subject line was simple: catching up. He asked if we could grab coffee, said he owed me an explanation. I stared at it for a long time, then typed a one-word reply. No. He sent another message a few days later, longer, more apologetic. I archived it without reading. Some bridges don't need rebuilding. Some lessons are only learned through silence. Things moved quickly after that. The bank signed a full-year contract. My team doubled in size. I got my own office on the 3rd floor with glass walls, a corner view, and a place where the light finally reached me instead of bouncing off someone else's reflection. The name on the door said Jordan Blake. No title, just the name. Inside, there was a whiteboard filled with plans for a fraud detection platform I'd been dreaming of building for years. At the top of the board, I had written one word in marker: mine. Every detail was real. Every diagram is drawn from scratch. No need to hide metadata or plant traps. Just clean, honest code written by someone who finally had room to think. Late one afternoon, I stood by the window and watched the city move. It felt quiet, but not the kind of quiet that comes from being ignored. It was the quiet of peace, of having nothing to prove, of finally being seen. I didn't need applause. I didn't need headlines. I had something better. My name is on the work, my fingerprints on the solution, and a team that knew exactly where it all started. With me.